want to talk about a saying that I heard recently, and I think it's super useful once you actually understand it, and it definitely has applications to learning a language. So you've probably seen the title of this video, and the saying is that even the greatest can be greater, and I'm going to explain what that means right now. So something I think a lot of people have, I think probably everyone's like thought about this at some point, which is that if you know, for example, that something is not a good idea, like just stick with me for a second. If you know something's not a good idea, but there's someone who's extremely good in that field who does the thing that's wrong, are they in the right because they're really good, or are you in the right because you know that that's not good for you? So I'll put it into an actual example for it to make sense. Say there's, for example, an athlete, and he's top of whatever top of whatever sport he's doing, and I'll make the connection to language learning in a second. But say he's the top of whatever sport that he's doing, but he's doing this one bad habit. Maybe it's he needs to eat a lot of food because he's doing intensive exercise, but the food he's eating isn't necessarily healthy, and there's a healthier way to do it. And you potentially have researched this, and even though you're not a high level athlete, you understand that the way he's eating isn't particularly healthy. But of course, he's the gold medalist. He's the top of the field. So is he in the right because he's excellent in this field, but he smokes or something on top of it? Or are you in the right because even though you're not as good as him, you know scientifically that something isn't good for him? And the answer is in the saying, even the greatest could be greater. It doesn't matter how good someone is. It doesn't matter how smart someone is in a certain field. If you know for a fact that something they're doing is wrong or bad for them, or they're saying something that's incorrect, or they're teaching something that isn't particularly useful, it doesn't matter that they are better than you, because even the greatest can be greater. If they did the thing that you know to be right, they would objectively be better at whatever they're doing right now. So if it's the athlete who's really, really good, but he vapes, for example, and then he's like telling people to vape, and you want to say like, I will make the connection in a second, I promise. I'm kind of trying to say it in the way it was explained to me. But if there's the athlete who vapes, for example, and he's like, oh, well, like, I'd like to see anyone beat me in a race. This is healthy, obviously. And you know for a fact that it's not arrogant or anything to think that, oh yeah, this gold medalist or whatever is wrong. Even though they're so much better than me at the field, they're wrong about this one thing. And it all ties back to the idea that even the greatest can be greater at the things they do. And he'd objectively be better if he didn't do that. So how does this actually connect back to language learning? It's an interesting problem, because although learning languages isn't like as simple as it's not like there's no league for it. It's not like an athletic sport, but there is certainly a sphere for it online, if we can put it that way. And a lot of the stuff that is peddled by people, and I'm not even going to call them scammers. I think a lot of the information that is put out onto the internet, even by polyglots who are very good at speaking, 5, 6, 7, sometimes 12 languages, I don't think a lot of what they talk about is particularly useful. And the reason for that is because everyone is different, and people operate at different levels. So I'll explain what I mean. But just to kind of finish on the idea that even the greatest could be better, and to kind of tie it into what I'm about to say about the language learning space, just remember that it doesn't matter how good someone is. If they're doing something is objectively wrong, if there's like the example I just gave, or if there's a polyglot saying, if there's a polyglot with eating really unhealthy food, for example, or they're not studying in a way that to be efficient, or they're trying to preach their learning style, which isn't the same as your learning style, it's not arrogant to think that this person is wrong. If you know for a fact, obviously, like you don't want to be like you don't want to talk above your level, but if you know for a fact that they're preaching something that isn't going to work for you, it's not arrogant to not listen to them, because at the end of the day, you own the consequences of your actions. So it's up to you to decide what you want to do. If you don't want to listen, that's fine. Maybe it turns out well, maybe it doesn't turn out well, but regardless, you own the consequences. So not moving on fully, but I want to connect into this idea of a lot of language learners on the internet not particularly teaching useful things. So something you need to understand is that what works for an expert doesn't necessarily work for a beginner. So if there's a polyglot who speaks 10 languages, and that's not me, for the record, at all. I'm kind of trilingual. I'm learning my third language at the moment. But if there's like an actual like super advanced polyglot who's speaking 10 plus languages fluently or anything like that, and they're giving advice, they're talking about things they do. For example, a couple of the things I've seen are like reading books in the foreign language without even learning it. They just read content for like 2 weeks, or potentially it could be any number of examples of things that you might hear and you just think, I don't think that's really going to work for me. Like maybe it's, I don't know. I feel like I'm getting analysis paralysis where there's like a gazillion different options to choose from. But just literally anything you might see that you don't think would be particularly useful, but it's being preached by someone who's very good in that field, that doesn't automatically make it useful for you. And the reason is because the things that they do at that high level are different to the things that you do at this low level. If you put, for example, if you took the fastest car in the world, I think that can go over 1,000 kilometers an hour. I don't know what petrol it runs on, but I presume if you put that in a normal car engine, like just a normal Toyota, I don't know what would happen, but there's a high chance I think that it would break the car. And the reason for that is because, let's say the engine. If you were to put the engine of the most powerful car and the wheels on a normal car, it would probably tear the car apart. And you would actually be worse off in a race. If you were racing a normal car, not that I condone racing on public roads, but I feel like these videos are a cause for people to come after me. They're all going to be shown in court sometimes. I already threatened to break into someone's house yesterday in a vlog, but if you were to take the engine of the most powerful car and the wheels and put them on a normal car and try and race it, you would actually be worse off than if you just raced the normal car normally, because the engine would just tear the car apart. And I think that's true in a lot of things, that analogy, because when you start to implement some of the things that very advanced people in their fields teach, it actually sets you back because you're not at that level yet. You're not at the level where you can just read content in a language for 2 weeks and not find it boring. You're not at the level where you can set extremely difficult goals because you'll be unsatisfied when you can't complete them. You're not at the level where you could just, for example, after a few sessions learning French, be able to speak to a native speaker poorly, but be able to speak because you've already learned Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, so it's easy to speak French. You're not at that level yet because you haven't learned that many languages. You don't have all the advantages a polyglot has. And potentially, I hate to talk about this because people love to say, oh, natural talent, and I think that talking about natural talent is the most useless thing ever because you can't control it. But sometimes if they're speaking 10 plus languages, potentially they do have a high level of natural talent where they're able to remember things easily. And so comparing yourself to them when they have an advantage is not necessarily useful. But that's the last I'll say of that because I hate talking about natural talent. So yeah, that's just something I wanted to talk about in this video. Don't think that just because someone is a high performer in that field, that the things that they're telling you to do are necessarily useful. Sometimes they're useful. Sometimes they are useful for beginners if they're people that are good at teaching. I hope, and perhaps I'm not, but I hope I am good at teaching as far as the advice I give. I do think I am fairly good at helping people learn a language, which is why I built a course, for example, if you want to check that out. But I do try and help people. A lot of people aren't particularly good at it, and sometimes their advice isn't even good for themselves. It's just bad advice that they're kind of putting out there for views, like when you see videos like how to learn a language in a week and all that, rubbish. So just remember that even the greatest could be better. If you know that a polyglot or anyone in any field is doing something objectively bad, like, I see bodybuilders eating junk food and all that stuff, and then other people are like, oh, it's arrogant to think that that's bad because they're so much stronger than you, and it's like, well, I know for a fact that that's wrong. So I don't care if they're better than me because they would objectively be better if they didn't do that. And that's the reality of the world. Even the greatest could be better. Not everything is useful just because it comes out of someone's mouth who's particularly good in the field. And the final takeaway is to remember you pay the piper in the end. You own the consequences of your actions. So be as informed as possible, make the best decisions possible, consider every angle, and don't take anyone's word as gospel. And yeah, that's just what I'd say as far as language learning goes. Yeah, that's the video. Thank you for watching.